Dr. Ernst van Jaarsveld is an icon. Today we visit him in his beloved succulent house to discuss the unique beauty of this resilient corner of the farm. Ernst, it's lovely to be here in the succulent house with you. I think after that walk we had through your succulent garden, would you like to enjoy a bit of we brought you a little bit of the green juice just to hydrate?
Bianca, thank you very much. Yeah, and it's one of my favorite juices.
Yes, it's
Thank you.
delicious. We are surrounded here by about 3,500 of your children, your plant children.
Exactly, Bianca. Yeah, it reflects the South African succulent plant riches, which is one of the richest in the world. But not only diverse, but also in life forms. And the largest, the baobab from the north, and the smallest, the dwarf, tiny little baby toes from the south.
So the whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum, and it all reflects the different climatic zones that we are. So very rich in the south in the winter rain, and as you proceed north, the plants the diversity becomes smaller, but in size they increase.
Yes.
And you get the bold and the big, and that's what we reflected also in our new rockery that we have just
You've
completed.
just built. We've just walked through this new succulent garden that you've planted. It basically, I think 6 or 7 succulent biomes are
Exactly.
represented along the embankment of this little river that flows behind us. And what precipitated that? What made you decide to capture that on the farm?
Well, the owners asked me to come up with a planting idea, and I said, well, let's make it a journey. And we start within the fynbos in the south in the winter rainfall and show that great diversity. And as you proceed north, we go through to the thickets, from fynbos to thickets, and then to the subtropical coast, and eventually ending up in the savannas in the north.
I must say, we've in this beautiful succulent house, and it's quite gusty today, but as you said, it's important. The wind also plays a role.
Wind is so important. If the wind doesn't blow here the southeaster, this time of the year, the north would not get rain.
So we're going to push through.
Exactly.
Okay, great. You were born in Pretoria, born and raised in Pretoria, and you, from a young age, were quite obsessed with frogs and insects. But when did the love for plants and specifically succulents start in your life?
It started more or less at the same time because I was always interested in reptiles. But on my father's farm, or my grandfather's farm, or my father grew up on the Highveld near Heidelberg, there was, we always collected all these different animals, but I also noticed there was many different plants, and I slowly became interested in the plants, and it later became the leading role in my interest in animals. And in fact, I wanted to do a course in nature conservation in the beginning, and but at the time they did not give that course, so
Yes.
I then did a course in ornamental horticulture.
Okay, so you became a horticulturist.
I became a horticulturist because I love growing plants. And it all started with my grandmother in a flat in Blairgowrie. I used to help her transplant and plant various little plants and make cuttings, and I enjoyed it so much. That's where my love started. So someone stimulating it's my grandmother, Oma Lizzie van der Spy.
Lizzie, that's a wonderful story. So you can start in an apartment and end up in the desert, in the Namib Desert, yes.
And wherever you are, you can grow a garden, whether it's a balcony, and
a windowsill.
Exactly, and wherever you come, there will be plants, and plants are so interesting. And there's always a plant for every garden and for every situation.
They always give something back.
Exactly.
Especially succulents, because they tend to survive. They're so resilient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Extremely resilient, and they reflect really shaped by suffering, and what we see as the beautiful end products, the beautiful ornamental products that we see. But we don't realize it's through hardships, and these hardships include animals that wants to eat them, so they developed all these defenses. So some of them were spines, like the Cactaceae family, and the Euphorbias, and then some with chemicals, like the impala lilies, very beautiful, very poisonous.
Yes.
And then some make use of camouflage, and by looking like the soil, they escape predation. So the beautiful lithops, which are so popular all over the world, the South African tiny little plants that often grown on windowsills.
You've been at the forefront of conservation and horticulture for more than 50 years. You were at the Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens for 42 years, Babylonstoren 10 years plus. So how, to your mind, How has the perception changed in terms of gardening in South Africa over the last 50 plus years?
Bianca, yeah, it changed a lot. So in the beginning, people only planted alien plants. And I saw this. And I saw this already at school. I was at school in Linden High School, and my father had a house. I saw the bulldozers coming in and clearing all those beautiful wild acacias. So characterful. And I couldn't understand it. And then I made it a lifelong obsession to encourage people to rather grow local indigenous plants.
You've also said that water-wise gardening is not just about saving water, but it's also about re-establishing indigenous landscapes. What exactly do you mean by that?
Exactly. South Africa is like a world in one country. And the climate is so diverse. In Europe, you've got one climate system. So it's very easy, and our gardening roots come from there. But in South Africa, you've got different regions. Fynbos in the south, which only gets winter rain. And in the north, more subtropical savanna or bushveld conditions. The subtropical coast. We've got desert on the west coast. And that makes it very, very challenging. And while doing a column in the Burger, Vra vir Ernst, I used to get questions on all these different regions. And I realized there's a lack of knowledge what to plant where.
People were basically perpetuating the gardening styles from Europe and further afield, and did not have a local identity in terms of having, I think it was seen as inferior to have
local plants.
Because poor dry areas were kind of seen as poor areas, and plants that thrived in dry areas were seen as poor plants. There's a bit of classism in the plant world, so to speak.
Exactly. South Africa is so rich in diversity, and not only that, but in beautiful ornamental plants. And in Europe, as I said, if you want to sustain a European garden, it's very, very expensive. Large lawns, lots of water. And when tourists come to South Africa, what would they like to see? Not another, if they come from Japan, they don't want to see another Japanese garden. They would like to see something so typical of South Africa. When
Absolutely.
they come to the Cape, they want to see rather a fynbos garden. And if they come to the bushveld, they would love to see a beautiful bushveld garden with all the beautiful acacia trees. And the same, if they come to the deserts parts of South Africa, to see the best of what is in the desert parts.
And the beautiful aloes of the Eastern Cape.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. Babylonstoren is home to many different gardening styles. There are lots of different types of gardens that form the greater Babylonstoren garden, yet it never feels disjointed, or it all flows beautifully, harmoniously from one to the other. Tell us a little bit more about the Garden of the Sun that you established, and why is it important in the greater Babylonstoren garden too?
So, the Garden of the Sun are very important, because where does our knowledge of all these indigenous plants come from? It comes from the koi and the sun, which lives in this area and used to live in this area before the arrival of Europeans. So we honor the koi and the sun people. So most of the plants within the 4 habitats we created there were used by them. So we created a little piece of fynbos, a little piece of Robertson Karoo, as well as the Calvinia region, and then the thickets of the Eastern Cape.
Do you actually go out and source all of these plants yourself, and all of the rocks and all of the stones to recreate these landscapes here at Babylonstoren?
Exactly, Bianca. So that was my work at Kersmos as well, and the glasshouse that I designed there, also in the different biomes. So from my experience that I picked up at Kersmos, I could use it very effectively. So I travel a lot, and in most of the habitats in South Africa, and I've been collecting plants throughout all these years. But I was very fortunate having a good relationship with Kersmos Botanic Gardens. Many of the plants I could acquire from them as well. And plants are so easily grown from cuttings or seed or offshoots. And so that's a wonderful thing of ex situ conservation as well.
Yes, I don't want to say people shouldn't buy plants, because nurseries fulfill an important function, but once you discover the joy of making cuttings and propagating your own plants, I think, is that when you become a gardener? I don't know when you become a gardener. Yeah.
You can become a gardener from any age. And once you see how easy it is, I think we all have green fingers in us, and we just need effective, just stimulation of that.
Yeah.
Like what I learned from my grandmother, and how I helped her.
Yes. You began building the succulent house in 2016. What was your vision at the time for this structure? And how has it evolved? Is it pretty much what you had in mind?
In mind, I had the diversity of succulent plants in South Africa. It is so rich, and to display just a small portion of that. So I decided to arrange it all into their various families and start into building it up. But luckily, I've got good ties with Christmas Botanic Gardens, and I could get many of the plants from my old collections. I could get cuttings or
and
shoots
yes.
that we could re-establish.
Ernst,
Yeah.
you are famously hands-on.
Yeah.
I understand you water the 3,500 plants in this house, in the succulent house yourself.
Yeah, it's important because plants need attention, and the plants tell us when they need water. So, but not all want water at the same time. So there's some plants from the winter rainfall time, and when it's summer, during the summers, I don't give them a drop of water.
During the summer, yes.
Yeah, because
those
they
yes,
are at rest.
at rest, yeah.
And that's where background knowledge comes in,
Yeah.
to know the plants. But also, even when a plant is unhappy or it's got a little bit too little water or too much water, it will tell you.
Do you speak to your plants?
I speak to my plants.
Out loud or mentally?
Mentally, sometimes out loud as well. But yeah, I love my plants.
Yeah.
And there's an affection between the plants and myself. So, and I've seen it as well with house plants.
Yes.
If you give them attention, and they respond.
Okay. We're going into the hippie zone now. I love it. You often say you never stop weeding, and even today in preparing to have a chat, the moment you see something, you bend down and you quickly
Exactly.
weed something. It's the constant gardener in motion.
When I see something in disharmony or something that I can weed when it's still young, I can still pluck it. Weeds are also important, but they shouldn't come up where they're not supposed to come up. But so I watch over the collection all the time.
You are an absolute lover of rocks, and you always say it starts with rocks. What do you mean by that? Rocks are underestimated generally?
Yeah, Bianca, to think we eat from the soil. In other words, plants have to grow. Where does soil come from? It comes from the geology, and we don't realize how important the geology is. That's why if you look at the mountains around us, the beautiful Simonsberg, the Cape Folded Mountains, they all consist of Table Mountain sandstone. And it's a sedimentary rock, very poor in nutrients. And those poor plants are always under stress. But in the end, they provide us with those beautiful, most beautiful adaptations with these beautiful fynbos plants. And these plants, again, others are adapted to richer soils. Fortunately, Babelstoring is situated in a basin with granite. Granite is a very rich soil, or much richer. So we've got a granite basin, also together with Malmesbury shale, which provides us a beautiful loam soil and which the plants thrive on. And if you give them the wrong soil, often they suffer. If they would feed you all the time only chocolates, for instance, we won't be happy. Or only very, very poor soil for some. So some require, so many require a balanced soil.
Ernst, you've often mentioned the importance of specifically, and I'm not even sure I pronounce it correctly, Sand River gneiss. Nice.
Yeah, gneiss.
What makes that particular rock formation so important?
Bianca, it's a very, very old rock formation. And it represents the Earth's surface about 3.5 billion years ago. Not million, but billion years ago. So, and gneiss, all what it is, it's granite under pressure. And that granite was like if you view the Earth, it's like a big oven below. And that granite were under great pressure for many, many for millions of years.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that produced a gneiss, which is a metamorphized rock. And it's a beautiful rock, not only very old, but it's a banded rock formation. And we wanted to bring some of these rocks back to Babelstoring for educational purposes. So we've got very young...
Is some of the gneiss used as the foundation for the rock gong, where we were on our way in?
No. The foundation for the rock gong were just silkrete. That's a local rock. And that rock weighed 30 tons. We brought it in. So that rock is about just more than 1 million years old. So silkrete is a very young rock. Yeah.
A million years young.
to 1 billion years.
When you're a rock and you're very old, it's great. But for humans, we're quite an ageist species. And one of the things that I love about working at Babelstoring is that we have older, very, very, very valuable people, especially on the garden team. You retired from Kirstenbosch at 65 and then started your employment at Babylonstoren 10, 11 years ago. And you've actually, I think, had an incredible year. 2025 has been quite special because you and the team, the Babylonstoren team, in collaboration with the Newt, created a phenomenal Karoo succulent garden at the Chelsea Flower Show.
Exactly. What a privilege to be involved in that. And when the owners asked me to do that in collaboration with the Newt Botanic Gardens.
Yeah.
So it all started with the owner phoning me up and said to me, we must produce something dramatic, but based on the Garden of the Sun.
Yes.
So, and then he involved obviously Kate Lewis, the
Katie
architect
Lewis,
at the Newt.
Yes.
And then he asked us to come up with a planting idea. So I also, Cornel Beekes, my young colleague, I also asked if he can be involved, and he helped us. So the three of us worked together, and Kate especially came to South Africa. We showed her all the main habitats, and which we recreated.
It was a phenomenal feat of intercontinental plantsmanship and planning. What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, the biggest challenge was to get all those plants back into the UK, and especially was I knew, and the biggest plants that we were to use were the quiver trees
and yes.
And many other plants, and I knew all the various laws, the CITES laws, the phytosanitary laws, and the plants had to be cleaned and had to be weighed, and they were flown in. The rocks had to be shipped, so that was a big procedure, and that involved almost a year. But the planting process was much quicker, obviously, once it was there.
Once everything was on the other side. And Katie Lewis and her team at the Newt also sourced a whole lot of succulents and stones. She sourced something similar to the Malmesbury shale. They went to one of the counties close to Somerset and actually had to dig down a meter or two, and they found a stone very similar to what...
Exactly.
To the Malmesbury shale.
So, yeah, so it was amazing how she... And I'm sure a geologist, if they see those rocks that she sourced from Britain, they would think it's Malmesbury shale. I don't think a geologist will be able to tell the difference.
It was a pretty spectacular sight against it was London in the backdrop and the London plane trees, and then in the midst of all of these soft English gardens and ornamental gardens, it wasn't really a garden. It was a landscape that was
created or
recreated. Yes,
that was a big challenge, and she even got sand from a place in England which resembled our red Kalahari sand, or from the Knashvlakte. So it was amazing, but it was and unfortunately also they were able to source most of the smaller succulents in England, and
from established collections.
From established collections as well as Europe. Yes. So most of our plants are already there, and also one of the requests of Chelsea is that all the plants that we brought in must be seed grown. And we were forced to source nurseries. For instance, all these quiver trees were...
So they had to have been seed grown.
So I knew Umbeis Visser very well. He was the owner of the Kokerboom Kwekerij in Van Reinsdorp. And I remember as a young man when I visited him, he was planting thousands of small little quiver trees in rows. And he said, this is my investment for my children in the future. And now his children are plucking that fruit of what he planted. So we used those quiver trees, now mature, and they were flown in. I'm so thankful to Cornel Beekes, my young colleague. He did most of the organizing, as well as Kate, the admin from the other side.
The paperwork, the passports for these plants,
that was like an obstacle course. And also just the packing of the plants as well. And also it was winter time in Europe, and we had to blanket most of these larger quiver trees.
I remember when you were packaging them to send over, and then once they'd arrived on the other side, Cornel told me you had a Zoom call with your quiver trees. You checked in on them via Zoom.
Yeah, so exactly. So we checked up on all the plants all the time. And also some of them just opened on the tarmac. There was a cold front and cold wind, and it damaged some parts of the quiver tree. But they will recover again.
What are the plans for the garden going forwards?
So the plans forward is to create a huge succulent dome at the Newt. And that's what the architects are busy planning. So the same garden which were created at Chelsea will be recreated, but much more as well.
Yeah.
So it will be a little piece of Karoo in the new for educational purposes to
In
show
Somerset.
exactly.
When you were at Chelsea with this phenomenal Karoo succulent landscape, I don't even want to call it a garden, how did people react? What were the most interesting or gratifying responses that the garden elicited from the crowd?
Now, the British and people from Europe are so used to just seeing green and lush green gardens
And blooms.
and blooms. And this was, suddenly this desert portion from the Karoo. And it was really, a lot of people they were just blown away and just said that was an incredible garden of having this arid adapted plants as a contrast to the monotonous Chelsea shows. And that was our boss's idea of the, why
I
not?
don't know if we can call it monotonous.
No, but it is very monotonous, and our boss wanted to do something drastic, and he wanted to end with a bang, and he ended up with this beautiful Karoo garden, which blew their minds away. It just shows that South Africa is more than just Cape Town, Kruger Park. The two-thirds of South Africa is desert,
Yes,
and
that's true.
and that we have such beautiful plants to display, and especially with their ornamental value.
I often feel succulents are seen as almost the ugly duckling in the
Ducklings.
plant family. They're not as posh as the beautiful blooms.
Succulents are more than just their flowers. They're actually grown for their beautiful architecture. And that architecture reflects hardships from the past. And it's their bold, beautiful shapes. So some with beautiful succulent leaves, others with their ornamental stems, and some with their camouflage properties. So the diversity is so great. And from the miniature ones like little baby toes or baby bottoms up to the big baobabs.
The baobabs.
And one can even have a baobab as a small bonsai, as a pot plant.
They are incredible.
They are beautiful plants.
You've just released the third edition of your Waterwise Gardening in South Africa and Namibia, the book. What does this edition have that the previous don't, and who should buy this book?
Bianca, it was updated.
Updated.
So all the new names and also especially the Afrikaans names were updated, as well as there's artwork and also the focus also on trees, where to plant trees in various parts of South Africa. And this book is really a general horticultural book encouraging people to grow local. And so it's years of experience, and it started all with that column I had in the Burger Vraag vir Ernst, because I had so many questions, and South Africa is like a world in one country. And I started with this new garden philosophy of rather base your garden on your local vegetation. It just makes it so much easier. The plants will be self-sustaining. Animals will come back, even your little lizards, and which is a different aspect of the garden, and birds as well.
Ecological diversity
It's
reestablished.
ecological gardening. That's, in other words, is bringing nature back into our homes.
I take it you are not a big fan of grass lawns and of sports fields and golf clubs.
I see the importance of it, Bianca,
Yes.
because no, it's also important.
Yeah.
And we all have children, and children wants to play on lawns.
Yeah.
But sustaining a large lawn takes such a lot of maintenance and water. So I encourage people to have smaller lawns, make use of natural ground covers, or even inorganic ground cover, like a pebble layer, as we've done here in the Welwitschia garden outside, and other parts of the garden itself.
Babylon's Turin actually has very little lawn space, and one doesn't even miss it. You don't even actually realize it, because there's so much else going on in with the gardens and the plants.
Exactly.
And the diversity is so phenomenal. There's always something to enjoy and look at. So it's just a change of perception, perhaps, and planting methods.
Exactly. If I think from where our roots started, European gardening, and it's slowly changing, and it's all for the good and for our future as well. And it's wonderful. Not only the gardens becoming more local, but also the architecture. We adapt and starting to develop our own character.
Yes.
A Cape garden and a Cape environment.
After so many years of planting and caring, tending for gardens and establishing gardens, what still excites you about getting your hands dirty in the soil and putting a plant?
Every time I work with plants, it's such a privilege, yeah, to see them grow. And I give them a lot of attention, and the garden itself. And so I can quickly see when there's something is wrong. And it's just, yeah, they're like my children. If they are, if they're sick, I can help them. And if they are thirsty, I give them water. If they're unhappy, I can try and make it easier for them by just providing that care and that love for the plants. And they show that in their performance. If they are happy, the happy plant, it's a healthy plant.
Gardening is how most people relax, or a lot of people relax through gardening. What do
Yeah.
you as a gardener do to relax when you get home after a long day of gardening?
And Bianca, gardening is still the most popular hobby in all the world.
Yeah.
So most people, when they come home, I think we're all plantsmen in ourselves. We just need to stimulate that. And once you start working with the plants and you see how the response. Also, we're so dependent on plants for food, for everything, but also for pleasure, just the beauty of them. And there's such an incredible diversity in South Africa. We don't know what we have. We are so privileged.
You've described gardening as serving three purposes in your life: pleasure, education, and research. And how do these three things intersect on a day-to-day basis?
I work at home. When I return back to Stellenbosch to my private garden, first thing is I go to my plants. I see if I water them, I feed my fish, and I look. Yeah, so I work all the time, make new cuttings, and just give them attention. And sometimes, it's full of surprises. So many of these plants are also new to science because we do a lot of research going out into the field. And it's so nice to see something, a plant which I'm not sure, and the first flower come, and I realize that's something new to science. And that's where the research comes in, and then naming that plant and describing it. And
I think that process of finding a new plant that hasn't been tabulated in, it's called authoring the plant.
Yeah.
Am I correct? So
Exactly.
you've authored how many plants?
many different succulents. And one, I'll give two examples. When we were in Britain now building that Karoo garden at Chelsea, I was amazed to find cliff bells. It's a beautiful Cotyledon pendens. Years back, I and a young student in the Mbashi River I saw this dangling little branches from the cliff face, and I said to Paul, help me, let's throw down some of these branches that I can grow it and see what it is. It looks interesting. And we threw rocks up, and a few branches came down, we grew it, and we realized it was a new species. So I named it Cotyledon pendens. And what I do is when I get a new species like that or any other, I first will propagate it and then send cuttings all over the world. And that's ex situ conservation.
Let's stop
So-
and just talk about the value of ex situ conservation, because some people feel you should always keep something where it's from, like it shouldn't travel. But you're a big proponent of ex situ conservation, and why do you choose that path?
I think it's very, very important because a lot of habitats become rarer as our humans increase, and we destroy a lot of plants. A lot of big plants became so rare, and some of them only live in gardens. If I can think of the Sierlat, it's also a plant it's a beautiful shrub. They're from Veldrift area, and saved from extinction from Floors Visser, who saw these plants that were plowed up, and he planted it at his house at Groot Klipfontein, Aurora. And when I started doing research on a group of plants, I saw this beautiful Sierlat plant with these beautiful bells. And I said to Fleurs, you saved it from extinction, I'm going to name it after you. So I named it Frelinia Vissery after Fleurs Visser. But
Did he realize he was saving it from extinction?
I think he did, because he realized it was when he collected, it was a new species. And Prof. Compton told him at the time. And that was in 1947. And all these years, nobody did something. And when I saw it in the herbarium, I realized, this plant must be named. And so I started doing research to try and find Oomfloers. And in the end, I did. He was then an older man as well. That's one example. Another example was also a beautiful beestong in the Eastern Cape, sitting on the cliffs. I was doing research and looking for another plant, and having my binoculars looking on the cliff I discovered a new species, a little Casteria glomerata, this little cliff oxtongue. And I took it home, grew it, and when it flowered, I could name it, and then spread the seeds all over the world. And when we were at Chelsea as well, we could easily access it in Europe. It's already so well established in Europe. So that's the secret with all these very rare plants, is to flood the market. So it's not necessary for people to destroy plants from their habitats.
Yes, because there is a lot of smuggling, plant smuggling.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is also true, and the best is to encourage people to grow these plants, but rather from cultivated source and not from plants taken from the field.
It's a win-win because
Yeah, exactly,
there are more plants, which is good for the planet
exactly.
and for humans.
Yeah, the more green we can plant, the better we combat climate change. Whether it's a tree or whatever, any green plant we plant, we contribute.
I feel terrible asking, but I have to. Do you have a favorite plant?
I've got many, but yeah, spekboom,
Top 10. Spekboom. Okay.
Yeah, spekboom, the
Yes.
Portulacaria afra. It's endemic, almost endemic to South Africa. Very widespread, especially the Eastern Cape. And this plant is amazing. It grows into tree size, but what is amazing about it, that it forms 85% of the adult elephant's food. But the amazing thing, it doesn't have thorns to protect itself. It doesn't have chemicals. It allows itself to be eaten. But instead of, by the abuse of the animals and the humans eating it, instead of dying, it used the abuse in growing itself. So all the branches that falls to the ground will grow.
So it's actually quite interesting. One can learn a lot about psychology if you look at how plants have adapted to survive.
Exactly, and that is passive resistance, and it shows it's always better to react in a passive way instead of a aggressive way. Exactly, and also I do a lot of research on plants on cliff faces, and those plants on the cliffs, what happens to them? They lose their aggression because the rock becomes a defense. They lose their chemical defenses. Again, they safely up on the cliff.
That's where the saying "hook in and hold on" comes from.
Exactly.
So after this wonderful conversation, could we perhaps end on a more frivolous note with a quick, like what we call a rapid fire question and answer session?
Sure.
Are you keen for that?
Sure.
Just so we get to know the whole Ernst van Jaarsveld
Welcome.
and not just the plant expert.
Very welcome.
Okay. What is the best scent or smell on the farm here at Babylon?
Sure, when the citrus comes into flower, it's
The
incredible.
blood orange.
Then everything just scent.
Favorite plant on the farm?
Sure, the fan aloe. It grows on Kanonkop, which is part of our farm, and it's a beautiful local bold fynbos plant.
What is your favorite view or sight? Oh, there was just the most gorgeous suikerbekkie. I don't know what it is in English. Beautiful bird. But what is your favorite view?
When I go up the Babylonstoren Koppie, right from the top, you have a 360 degrees view. And it's so beautiful to look at all the beautiful mountains, and Babylonstoren, surrounded by these beautiful, lovely
Rock formations
yeah.
and you just love rocks. I don't have a what's your favorite rock question, unfortunately, because I ask the same questions to everyone. Your happy place. Do you have a happy place here at Babylonstoren where you go to have a bit of quiet time?
Definitely. I think the best, apart from the various succulent gardens, the best place is the shade garden. And it's a little bit out of the way, Cinderella area, but a few people know about it. And it is filled up with all these different shade plants of South Africa. And it brings calmness because it's the shade as well as all these beautiful ground covers and the river flowing past.
It is really this little secret garden, and it's almost the polar opposite to this wonderful succulent house because it's really a little microclimate that seems almost subtropical. And very few people that visit Babylonstoren, or even people who work here, know about it. So I find that a phenomenal
And it's
place.
like gardening never comes to an end. So in that garden as well, we are always busy planting, and there's so much more ground. We try to stabilize all the embankments as well, and with the various plants. So it's like a big experiment as well, but it gives me such pleasure to see how the plants respond to that, and how they grow, flower, and how happy they grow in that shade environment. And there's different benches when one can sit and just be quiet.
It is a magical space. What is your favorite Babylonstoren product?
I prefer olive oil,
Ah,
and I just love olive oil, and so I use it in foodstuffs all the time.
okay. Which one do you like? The blend, the Caratina, or the Francoio?
Doesn't matter. They all do
They
the
all-
same, serve the same purpose, and it's such a healthy product as well.
I'm impressed. I didn't actually expect a kitchen ingredient. That's lovely. And your favorite animal on the farm, or insect, or reptile?
Right, it is a reptile. It's a leopard tortoise.
Oh,
And
yes.
tortoises, they're such gentle animals, and also they carry their protection on their backs, their hard shell, just like a snail. But they are mobile, and they just retreat into this shelter when they are threatened. But such docile and mostly vegetarian. And we've got so many different ones. And South Africa sits with the world's greatest diversity of land tortoises on the
Tortoises.
planet Earth. And we conserve some of that. So we're also a big tortoise reserve. And we've recently created a little tortoise den for people to see near our glass house for the children to appreciate, and the educational value of the tortoises as well. And they're mine
Everybody
of
loves it.
succulents.
Yeah, everybody loves a tortoise.
And they come from deserts. And you're right.
There's a thread that runs through all of our topics of conversation that we keep on getting back to, and I think it very much, you embody it yourself, is gentle and resilient. Thank you very much, Ernst, for everything you do for us and for Babylonstoren.
It's a pleasure, Bianca, and thank you for this interview.
Just a bit windy, but we're used to it.
Yeah,
We push
Part
through.
of nature.
Part of nature.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.